Welcome to Book Banter with me, your host, Dianne Burkhart. I hope you will join me every Wednesday as we explore all things to do with, well, books. Let's get on with our show today. Hello, my happy people. Today is December 13th, and have we got a great show for you. Oh my gosh, so much is going on right now. We're in full swing of the holidays. Hanukkah is already in progress. We've got Yule coming up. Christmas is just around the corner, and I am not prepared for any of it. Which I thought I was going to do Christmas shopping while we were in the United States visiting my family for Thanksgiving, and I bought one thing that was just a little stocking stuffer, so I'm kind of scrambling right now as I also try and do things like renew my passport in Germany, so that's kind of fun. And speaking of my passport, I need to send a shout out right now to Prairie Dog Comics in Wichita, Kansas. These guys saved my bacon, and I cannot be more grateful. First of all, this is a wonderful comic book shop. It is the only place I ever bought comics whenever I was living in the United States. They're absolutely fabulous. They know what they're talking about. If you are looking for any comic book related items, they are definitely the place to go. From pre-comics code books to current age graded comics, incentive variants, and so much more. Feel free to contact them with any questions or special requests. They will help you. And just so you know, if you can't get into their store across from Town West Mall, they also have an eBay store. You can find it just by searching Prairie Dog Comics. Or you can email them at pdogcomics@gmail.com. Trust me, if you love comics, this is the place to go. They're wonderful. And I would not have my passport and be in Germany right now if it wasn't for them, because somehow I managed to lose my passport out of my wallet while I was in their store. And somebody found it and just tossed it in a box of odds and ends on the floor in their shop. They found it, found me, and got my passport back to me. We were leaving the country in like 2 days. If I had gotten to the airport and then realized at that point that I did not have my passport with me, I would have lost my mind. These guys saved my sanity and saved me from taking my husband down with me because I would have gone nuts because we were all over town while we were there. So thank you so much to Prairie Dog Comics. You guys are fantastic. If you love comics, you need to go to Prairie Dog Comics because it is fabulous. They have what you need. And if they don't, they will get it for you. But now let's get on with today's show. We have got a fantastic guest. She is so amazing. We had a long, wonderful conversation. She has been a traditionally published author. She's done hybrid publishing. She's done indie publishing. She's had fantastic agents. She's gone without agents. She has been a teacher of writing. She has done just about every aspect of publishing that you can think of. And she has got so much information to share. You're going to love her book. She has got a new book out right now that's called A Woman's Guide to Search and Rescue, and it is fabulous. So let's get right to it. You're going to love her. Please welcome to Book Banter with Dianne Burkhart, Mary Carroll Moore. Usually, the way that I like to start all of the interviews is I just have somebody give us their elevator speech. Tell us who you are and what you do.
I'm Mary Carroll Moore, and I'm a food journalist turned novelist. And I have a new book out called A Woman's Guide to Search and Rescue, which is about a fugitive who crashes a stolen plane in the mountains and has only one place to run, which is the family she's never met. So it's a story about sisters and their reunion and different kinds of relationships that women have, women heroes, pilots, and all kinds of exciting thriller aspects as well.
You actually seem to know a bit about piloting.
My mom was a World War II pilot, and when she was 22, she joined the Women's Air Force Service Patrol, which was at that time a non-military part of the war effort where women took over male pilot work. So they ferried bombers and did training and all kinds of things. And she was only 22, but she had her commercial license, and she was just an amazing person, a very brave woman at 22.
And
And
that's incredible.
I know 2 years she was in this service. And when I was growing up, my friends would say, "What's your dad do?" And I said, "Well, my mom's a pilot." It's like, I was so proud of her. Yet she had 4 kids and she had to stop flying when she was pregnant with my older sister. And she never went back. And I lived with this mystery of who she was my whole life. And so this book is a way for me to share how inspired I was by women heroes like her, but also get to know her a little bit because I took flying lessons and I really wanted to understand what she had gone through as a pilot. At 22, you can't imagine. She had an engine fire and had to land dead stick at LaGuardia. It's that kind of a history that I live with. And so this book is a bit of a legacy honoring her.
And I think one thing needs to be put into perspective too. She became a pilot back when women couldn't even have their own credit card.
Exactly.
If they wanted to buy a house, they had to have their father or husband or somebody else sign for it for them.
Yes.
They couldn't have a bank account in their own name. And she became a pilot.
She had a younger brother, I think, and he took pilot lessons, of course, because he wanted to join the Air Force for the war effort. And my mom, who's very competitive, went to my grandfather and said, "You're giving him pilot lessons. I get them too." Mm-hmm. So she took them alongside her brother, and she ended up loving flying. She just adored it. And so I guess my grandparents were a little bit on the open-minded side, you'd say. Mm-hmm. But my mom always talked about how there was so much prejudice against women pilots in the service. It was just awful. Sometimes she'd be more qualified than her co-pilot, and yet they would talk down to her. And it's really a man's world in aviation, but women are very, very good at it. So I'm so proud of her, that she could live through that.
Well, and that's amazing, and especially that you were able to produce this book in honor of what she has accomplished.
Yeah. And it's a story about women finding each other too. It's a very complex story. It's a thriller aspect, which is the chase, the search and rescue, the pilots, the plane crash that opens the story. But the main core of it is the emotional story for me. The two half-sisters, the idea of found family and redemption, basically, as a life possibility.
Now, I do want to back up a little bit here because you did not start out as a fiction author.
No. I was a food writer. I lived in France and I studied cooking, and I came back to the US and started my career as a cooking teacher. And I got invited to write a monthly food column for Arizona Magazine. And from there, I went on to open a cooking school in San Francisco Bay Area. And it was featured in USA Today and all kinds of places. And I got asked to contribute to cookbooks for the California Culinary Academy. And then that went on to become my career. I became a syndicated columnist with the LA Times and wrote a weekly food column that was in 86 papers around the country. So it was a really, really wonderful experience. I opened a restaurant for a firm. So it was a wonderful career. I smelled like garlic all the time. And I worked really late hours because that's the way the restaurant industry is. And I wrote about food constantly. So I was constantly testing recipes in my kitchen and researching ideas for food. And it was wonderful. But then there was a point where I realized that my real dream was to write fiction. And about that time in my life, I was diagnosed with breast cancer, which is, for anybody who's had it, who's listening out there, it's a full stop, as you know, and you get to reevaluate what you really want to do and what you came here for. And I realized that, yes, I loved food and I loved cooking, but my passion was fiction. I love telling stories. So I ended up going back to school for my MFA, and I learned another language, really, because fiction is completely different than food writing. And I've had 2 novels published now, and I'm about to have a 3rd. So it's been wonderful. I'm very lucky. Not everybody gets to do this. I get to change careers.
One of the things that I've always liked asking people who were journalists first and then got into fiction writing, do you think doing it in that direction helps you to write tighter?
Definitely. Yeah, that's a really good insight. I had a 600-word limit on my column every week. So I had to condense a whole sensory experience plus a recipe into 600 words. And it was very hard. At first I didn't know how to do it. I would have to tell a little story or give some kind of interesting background on an ingredient that I was featuring and describe it in a really enticing way so people would kind of taste it as they read. But that caused me to train myself. I did it for 12 years. So I trained myself on how to really condense the sensory detail into a very small amount of page space. And so when I went into scene writing for fiction, the same thing happened. I had this training on how to, okay, what's the core of this scene? What's the emotion of it? What's the sensory detail that I really want to contribute to the reader? And then not spend a lot of time on other stuff that was peripheral. So yeah, you nailed it, Dianne. That's exactly what I learned from journalism. And I did bring it to fiction.
And one thing that I've noticed too, you also seem to be quite the teacher. Not only did you have the cooking school, but you do a lot of teaching on your website. You have,
I know, yeah.
You have writing prompts. You have tutorials that you do on YouTube. Is that something that you want to continue?
I actually love teaching, and I taught pretty full time for a number of years, taught cooking, and then taught writing. And I loved the whole experience of how to, again, it's like condensing down to the essentials. I loved how to take a concept like, oh, how do you write a scene? Or how do you bring a bad character into kind of a certain perspective so that they're not stereotyped? I love taking those kinds of problems and figuring out, well, how would I transmit this to somebody that's struggling with this aspect? And so that whole process of learning how to translate concepts into words that other people can use, it's still with me. I intend to keep teaching through my Substack newsletter. It's called Your Weekly Writing Exercise, and it has about 3,000 followers right now. And I expect that to grow because I just started on Substack. I had the newsletter every Friday morning since 2008. So the feeling I have of writing every week and thinking of something like, oh, this week somebody wrote me and said, rejection is so hard as a writer. How do creative people get over the discouragement? So my mind immediately went to work about, okay, what have I learned and what other resources can I offer on this topic? So that's kind of the process I go through. And then I create the newsletter every week to answer that kind of question.
Now, you've also started out in your creative process as a painter. I was looking at some of your work. You were quite the impressionist.
Yeah. I studied with an impressionist teacher who studied with a fellow named Henry Henchy, who's a student of Charles Hawthorne, which was the Hudson River Valley painters. And it's a school that started in, I think, the 1800s. So I was lucky enough to find a teacher who was from that lineage. And I studied for many years. Yeah. It's always been a love of mine. So I have writing and I have painting as kind of a toggle. When I can't write, I get stuck. I can go to my easel and paint for a while, and then ideas start to come, and then I go back to the writing. So I find a lot of creative people have more than one outlet. They, they sing or they do gardening or they do something that's creative that it takes their mind off of that intention that they have for a book or whatever, so that they can relax their creative self and get ideas and then come back to it. So I find painting does that for me. I am trained and I'm an exhibiting artist and I'm in galleries and things like that, but it's not my main focus. It's something I do for love. And the writing is the thing that I really put my most attention on.
Well, I can tell you that the piece that you did called Bouquet of Poppies, that one was my favorite.
Oh, thank you. Those were really hard to paint.
That's why it was my favorite, because I know poppies are hard to do, and you did a fabulous job on those.
Oh, I remember that painting. I was so flummoxed by, like, there's 1,000 shades of red. And how am I going to get all of these and make it look, three-dimensional and all? But thank you very much.
So, poppies have a tendency to look like crepe paper, and to try and do all those variations in it to make it look like that. And to do that in an impressionistic style where you're not doing it exactly and still give that image of a poppy, that's tough.
It was. It was. I don't know how many times I redid that one, but there you go. Thank you. That's really nice to hear.
So, can you tell I come from a family of artists?
I can. I actually hear you being an artist yourself.
Now, you not only have like all of these different varied interests, but you also have some various publications. I mean, you've done newspaper, you've done magazine, you've done books, you've done cookbooks, you've done so much. What can you possibly do next?
Oh gosh. Well, I have this book coming out in spring that is another kind of a women's fiction thriller combination. It's a little paranormal. It's about a woman who is a portrait artist, because a lot of my characters are artists. And when she paints a person's face, she sees their future. So she's gotten into trouble. She's painted things unconsciously into someone's face that is not what they want to see. And it's caused a lot of scandal in her life. So she escapes the latest scandal and she goes to an island in the Caribbean, and she's kind of desperate for money. So she ends up using those abilities to see the future at the backgammon table, because this island hosts these enormous worldwide backgammon tournaments, and she ends up winning a lot of money. And so she's tempted to use these powers to cheat, basically, and keep winning. And the whole story is about second chances. Does she get a second chance? And can she figure out how to integrate these unusual abilities she has in a way that makes her able to live with them and not be somebody that has to constantly run from who she is? So I think that's my next big project, is this book coming out. And then after that, I'm going to continue to work with these Substack newsletters every week. It's such a wonderful community on Substack. It's like the best social media there is right now to me. And I've been asked to write a sequel to Women's Guide to Search and Rescue, where the two sisters go off to find their father, who has basically abandoned both of them. So there's a chance I might write that one too. I don't know. It's like I've done a lot, and I might need to kind of sit back now and take up painting again, that kind of thing.
Seems like you have a lot of different interests that you can fall back on. There are so many things that you could do.
Yeah, there are. So it's just a matter of slowing down enough to figure out what I want to do, I guess.
Isn't that always the way?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, having a book come out, this Women's Guide to Search and Rescue that's just been released in October, it's like running a marathon, and it's exciting, and a lot of wonderful experiences, like talking to people like you, Dianne, and having these reviews come out that are just so glowing and so heartfelt. And it makes me feel like I've really done something to be proud of. But it's also very exhausting to have that much energy going to a project, and then it's fulfilled, it's manifested, and now I kind of want to, okay, it's winter. I want to kind of hole up someplace with my to be read pile.
Yeah.
Books to me are everything. So I usually multitask. Is it called double booking now?
Mm-hmm.
You read more than one book at a time. So
now, I was going through some of your newsletters that you had on there and reading the Playing the Agent game. That sounds like you have a really interesting history dealing with traditional publishing.
I do.
There is so much advice that you have in this one article that I think a lot of people should really, especially first-time indie authors who are trying to decide how to go about getting their first books out there. This is some fantastic information. Do you want to tell our listeners about that one?
Sure. I get that question so much from students and readers. How do you get an agent? I'm interested in an agent. Is an agent worthwhile? So I've been published by mainstream, major publishers. I've been published by small presses, and I've gone indie, basically creating my own imprint and publishing my own books. And I found that in the very beginning, when I first started writing, that was back in the 80s, and I had an agent for my first book, and that agent stayed with me for about 3 books. And these were in the food journalism. These were cookbooks. One of them won a Julia Child Award. It was like a major thing, and I didn't even know what it was at the time. I was too new. And then he retired, and I had thought, well, it's kind of cool to have an agent. And so he recommended somebody. It was a friend of his who ran a big agency in New York City. I mean, if I said the name, you'd know it. And he was one of the principals. And he was friends with my agent. So my agent retired, referred me to this guy, and we signed a contract. He said he'd represent me for my next book. And weeks and months went by, and I never heard from him. And nothing that I had felt with my first agent was coming true with this big name guy. So in the end, I fired him. And my friend said, "Are you crazy? Do you know what it takes to get signed by somebody like that?" And I said, "Well, he's not doing a thing for me.
Mm-hmm.
He's not interested in my career. He's really not supporting me." And I always felt like agents should be, if you want one, they should be somebody that can help you figure out what you want to do, what path to take as a writer, what books are viable in today's market, how to make one that you really want to write more viable, for instance. So I realized I didn't really like that whole experience. And I thought, well, what if I just went on my own? You don't have to have an agent. So I ended up selling another 4 or 5 books by myself to small presses. And I realized I guess I don't need an agent. Maybe, and they're harder to get now. It's getting more competitive, and the average agent gets like 6,000 queries a week and things like this. I thought, This is not for me. So then when I decided to go into fiction, I sold 1 book to a small press on my own, and that was published in 2009. And then I just had this curiosity, I guess. And also as a teacher, I wanted to understand more about the publishing industry today and what it takes to get an agent. So I said, okay, I'm going to do an experiment. I'm going to take a year. And one of my industry friends said, well, you need to query at least 75 agents. That's the average right now before you get a yes, which sounded outrageous to me. But I said, okay, I'm going to list 75 agents on this big chart that I made. I researched them online and found ones that I thought would be good. And I started querying. And it was an amazing process. So I'm glad I did it because I understood the whole thing. And I did get an agent from that. About the 40th person I queried decided to rep me. And then I wanted to understand how it would be to work with somebody compared to being on my own. And the thing I learned was that there's different kinds of agents. There's agents that are hands-on agents. And then there's agents who prefer to have the manuscript completely ready. And then all they do is the business side of it. Mm-hmm. Well, I had happened to get a hands-on agent, which, having been a writer and editor for a long time myself, I really appreciated. And this agent was able to take the book that's just come out, A Woman's Guide to Search and Rescue, and tell me where I needed help, really. I started out writing about these 2 estranged sisters who've never met because of their father's betrayal. And it was focused on internal questions like, what would it mean to be unwanted? What would it mean to search for family but never be sure you'd be welcomed into it? And who might rescue you from that kind of loneliness? And the agent said, well, I love the novel, but you need a plot. So then I worked for a year with a thriller writer who was an instructor at UCLA. And he helped me build the whole thriller plot, which includes the plane crash, the escape, and the chase. And then I went back to my agent and I said, here, I have a plot now. And she said, you have too many murders. You're not a thriller writer. Dial it back. So again, I went back to the manuscript and I took out some of the more violent scenes and focused on developing the relationships. And it really sounds like a convoluted journey. Well, many books are, but you don't really know your strengths in a story that you're telling at first. So you try one thing, it doesn't work. You try another, and it's like a 1 step forward, 2 steps back experience. And my agent was right. My real strength in storytelling is women's emotional lives. So from this, I learned even a rich interior life does not make a strong story by itself. It has to have that outer structure. And she was instrumental in helping me find myself as a writer with this it's a very complex, more sophisticated book than I'd ever written.
Now, you also have your book starts here. What is that one about?
That came from my classes from teaching for 20 years with different writing schools. And I got very interested early on in structure, why people fail with books, writers fail with books. Often it's because they start with an idea and they do the free writing or the flow writing to get that idea on paper, which is very appropriate and important. And then there comes a point where they have this overwhelm of material, kind of like post NaNoWriMo. I have 90,000 words. What do I do with them? Mm-hmm. It's that kind of feeling. So I'd find that many writers would come to me in my classes and say, I don't know what to do with this massive material. Can you help me structure it? So I began researching structure and what it meant in writing. And I found that it's very rarely taught. It was never taught in my MFA. And people don't understand the idea of, backing away from a manuscript and evaluating it for two, what I call a sine wave. One part of the sine wave or the helix is the outer story, the plot, the external action. And then the other part is the internal story or the emotional story or the change or transformation. Some people call it the narrative arc. So how do you weave these two together? And that's what I began working on. And that's where Your Book Starts Here came about, because I wanted to document what I had learned and what my students had taught me about these weaving together of these two strands. I think it's been out now for 12 years and it's still selling well, and people are really using it, because that's the mystery. I think most people just go, I don't know what to do with all this material, I think the maturing of a writer is basically acknowledgement of what you do well and then where you need help.
Now, this is the part of the show where we like to do 5 quick questions that never turn out to be quick, but I will never give up on this bit because I'm just that stubborn. Are you ready?
I am ready. I'd love to hear.
Number 1, what is your favorite holiday?
Thanksgiving. Food writer, right?
Oh, yeah.
Food
okay.
writer.
That makes sense. So what is your favorite thing about Thanksgiving?
The smells that, I go into my recipe files and I think, oh, what can I make this year that's new and different? And I have 15 people come. We have a very small country home in southern New Hampshire in the mountains, and it's crowded. 15 people around this table that we construct out of many tables, and everyone brings something. So I kind of orchestrated a little bit, tell, you bring this, you bring that. And then I make the main parts of the meal. And we always get a turkey from down the road from the farm, and we brine it overnight. And it's just always such a big food event. And it's all about how much great food you can have on that one table. People just go nuts over, oh my God, this year, look what you made, So that's my favorite holiday for sure.
Oh, that sounds fantastic. Question 2. When do you start shopping for the holidays?
Oh God. I usually try to pick up stuff all year and stash it away. If I find something at a crafts fair in the summer, for instance, for a friend or family member. But there's usually also a kind of blitz about 2 or 3 weeks before where I go online and I go, oh my God, what can I get this person? So there's a combination. If I'm smart, I'll have stashed. This year, because my book came out, I did not stash stuff. And so it's going to be a blitz time.
Yeah, me too. I don't look forward to that. So question 3, I already know the answer to this, but our listeners probably don't. So do you have fur babies?
I do. I grew up with cats. My mom raised Siamese kittens for Christmas and present money.
Aww.
But I got introduced to the world of dog lovers in my 40s, and I have now 2-year-old dogs. They're miniature long-haired dachshunds, and they run the house. It's like having toddlers. It's just so much work, and I adore them.
So question 4, who is your artistic inspiration for your paintings?
Good question. I think it would have to be my teacher, Susan Sarbach, who ran the School of Light and Color in California for many, many years, and her teacher, Henry Henchy. They are the modern day impressionist painters that I studied with and absolutely love. I'll never get close to being as good as them, but they inspire me.
Now, is there a classic painter that you're fond of?
So many. Oh my God. I loved Cezanne when I was studying art in college. All that group of painters, Degas, Monet, Manet, just everybody who is the main impressionist. Van Gogh too. Different aspects of different people. Van Gogh for his wildness, Degas for his intensity of form and shape and focus, into the tiny details.
So now question 5. Can you give us a writing example of your weekly writing exercises you do through your Substack?
Yes, I can. So this past week, Friday was the day, I wrote a column called Doing What You're Most Scared of. And I find that a lot of writers have these self-imposed limits on what they'll write about, memories or feelings or something kind of keeps them in a little box. So the weekly writing exercise with this particular article was about risk assessment. And it says, make a list. You can do 3 to as many items as you want of things you've put off doing because of fear or not wanting to be foolish. And you ask yourself what's humming in the background of your creative life that you've tried to shut away but haven't entirely succeeded. And then you rate each one with a risk level. 1 is not much risk. 10 is high risk. It's very individual. So what's risky to you might not be to anyone else. And nobody's going to see this. So I ask people to be as honest as they can and then choose the lowest risk item on the list and place it in the center of a page. You draw a circle around it and lines radiating off like spokes from a wheel. And on each spoke, you're going to write 1 reason you haven't done this risky thing. Then another circle gets drawn around all those spokes. And now you write small steps you might take if you were to try it. So when I did this for myself, the risky thing was to write about sisters and sisters reuniting because my older sister died early. She was an addict and it was a very unhappy situation. And I always missed getting to know her as she and I got older. So my book was unconsciously moving in that direction about sisters reuniting. What if there was redemption? What if there was a chance to have second chances with your sister? So when I did this cluster exercise, a big risk was, do I really want to go into that story of mine? Do I want to experience the pain again in order to write about it? And I decided that I would try a very small step of writing a scene, which would be a reunion about 2 estranged sisters. And when I wrote that, I had this enormous feeling of relief that I was actually starting to talk about something that meant that much to me. So when I've shared this exercise in classes, it seems very simple, but I think people have quite profound experiences with it, finding those things that they really, really deeply want to write about, but they have been holding back. So that's an example of one of the exercises.
That is very cool. And I think that is definitely beneficial. There's so many conversations that I've had with authors on this podcast. And one of the things that it does amaze me is how many people say, oh, I would love to try that, but I'm afraid to. I don't want to fail at it.
Right.
And the thing is, people, I think, need to reframe the way that they look at failure. It's just your first attempt. You didn't fail. You didn't succeed. But you learned some valuable information to help you do it better the next time. It should be more like a science experiment where you're trying to figure out the proper method that you need to achieve the results you want. And sometimes it takes a lot of trials.
It really does, Dianne. It's a very good way to say failure is not necessarily what it's cracked up to be, that we've failed and we should never try again. It is actually an experiment. You're right. That's true for me.
Well, people who have succeeded have failed so many times that you don't see. That the person who has finally achieved their goal has had more failures in their life than the person who has never achieved anything because they were too afraid to try. The thing is that's different is those people who are successful didn't let their failures stop them.
That's absolutely true. So this book that's just been published became an Amazon bestseller in its first month of pre-orders in August. And I couldn't believe it. My friend who's an author called me up and she said, you got to check out your Amazon rating. You're a hot new release. And I said, how could I possibly be a hot new release? She said, well, people are buying your book. And it shot up to number 4. And I thought, wow, this is so incredible. How come this didn't happen with the other books? They did well. They're still in print, some of them. But this book is like a jet plane. And I could not figure it out. And I thought, well, it's because I put 10 years of hard work into it. It's not an overnight thing. It's like you're saying, I failed many, many times. And I'm so stubborn that I kept doing it. I kept working on it until I got something that I'm really, really proud of. And evidently other people like it too. So it's a great message for your listeners is just you don't give up. You don't give up.
Well, and one of the things for anybody who actually has been following along, they've heard this story several times about, I've had several brain surgeries and I actually died at one point. And I can tell people the thing that I learned from that was that in that hospital room, when I was lying in that bed, feeling myself dying, I did not sit there and think, oh my God, I did so many stupid things in my life. I can't believe I did these things. I wish I hadn't done those. I didn't think about any of that. I thought about, oh my God, I wish I'd been brave enough to try that. I wish I would have done this. I wish I would have done that. And I knew whenever I started getting better that I was not going to have those thoughts the next time around. I was going to do everything that I wanted to do, no matter how stupid I looked, how weird it made me look, how many risks I had to take, whether I failed, 100 times to be able to do it. I didn't want to be sitting there thinking, I wish I had been brave enough to try that.
So true. Well, good for you. Really. That's what people need to hear today, because a lot of us live in fear. It's a crazy world, and yet if you don't reach your dream, if you don't reach out and try to do some things you're a little scared of, it's a very narrow life.
Mm-hmm.
So, I had cancer and that's what changed me and made me go back to school and do the thing I really wanted to do, which was get my MFA and start writing fiction. You don't have to have that kind of traumatic experience in order to wake up to what you really need to do. But it does help to hear stories like yours and know that, it's a transformation that happens. You've got to take charge of it and move forward. I know it's easy to say and hard to do.
Yeah. I think whenever you do have kind of like those traumatic, life-changing experiences, it does kind of like give you a wake-up call that you cannot really pass on to somebody else who has been living quietly and comfortably. It's really hard to explain. But if I could gift other people something, I would love to give them that gift without having the trauma, but just to go out and do what you want to do. Follow your passion and don't worry about looking stupid or weird or failing, because at least you're trying to go after your dreams. And that's more important.
And at the end of your life, that will make it all the difference.
Definitely.
That's the way to go.
Now, we have been asking one bonus question with the holidays coming up. We have been building a list of author suggestions for gift giving ideas for the holidays. And we're asking for one for a writer and one for a reader.
Okay. I can think of two things that, depending on how much money you want to spend, one is $50-ish and one is just $14, $15. Mm-hmm. So the $50 one would be a subscription to a writing program called Scrivener.
Oh, yeah.
And it's put out by literatureandlatte.com. And I think it's $49 for the software. It changed my life as a writer. It's the most amazing program I've ever worked with. And I know there are many out there, but I'm a Scrivener nut. So that would be my suggestion for one. And the other would be for fiction writers. One of my favorite fiction teachers is George Saunders. And he wrote Swim in the Pond in the Rain, which is a wonderful book about how characters and how fiction is developed from a seed idea. And he uses a very intuitive process that it's quite amazing. So those would be my writerly presents.
Mm-hmm.
For a reader, my favorite book right now that I've just finished reading was Tom Lake by Ann Patchett. So I'd recommend that. It's beautifully done. If somebody likes audiobooks, Meryl Streep narrates that one. And it's a knock your socks off experience to listen to her.
Ooh, that would be good.
Amazing. So that's like that would be my favorite Christmas present recommendation for a reader.
Okay.
Who likes audiobooks.
Honestly, it's like on my side too. I've been talking to so many authors about them wanting to do audiobooks and the expense that they have to go to produce audiobooks for indie authors. And I'm just thinking, I can't even imagine how much it would cost to have Meryl Streep doing your audiobook.
I know. I did audiobooks for my 3 fiction books, and I found a narrator after much auditioning in California who is phenomenal. And it makes such a difference to have a good narrator.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I've been turned off of good books just because I didn't like the voice.
Yeah. I actually played around with creating an audiobook. I did like a beta version just myself, and I give it away for free on my website. And it was so funny. I had my father listen to it because he will give me his honest opinion. And he was like, where did you get all those people to do this audio? I'm like, Dad, That's me. That's all me.
That's
And he
great.
didn't know. He didn't even recognize my voice on some of the characters. I'm like, all right, all right.
Wow, that's good. That's a big compliment. Well, you have a good voice for it. I've been asked to record sections of my book out loud for
Mhm.
different podcasts, and I find it quite hard. Audio narration, the voiceover skills, they have to be really good. So, congratulations to you.
Well, I think it helps too. I have a background in broadcast.
Oh, yeah.
So I've actually been trained to sound good on
Yeah.
audio.
Oh, that's a completely different thing. Yeah, I
Yeah.
haven't. You can tell.
So now, is there anything that you think the listeners need to hear about you that we have not discussed?
Let's see. I think that there's two ways to approach structure or plot in a novel. And I was very curious about this. And one of my interviewers said, you have a lot of conflict in your book, with the law, with the bad guy, with storms, with the body. But the pivotal moment of the entire story that changes everything is one of connection, not conflict, when the sisters meet finally. And I think this is an interesting idea that it's a more positive strategy for building a narrative, meaning that conflict and intimacy can do the same work to drive change and action in a story. And this might be something for your listeners to think about. There's a masculine approach to structure, which encourages you to build in a lot of outer conflict in the form of fights or bad guys doing bad things or life and death confrontations, murder, buildings burning up, things like that. And then there's a feminine approach where something is kind of spiraled around into connection. It's not that you don't have outer conflict, but it's not a straight line plot with its predictable rise and fall that's dependent on outer events, but it's more unpredictable and more emotionally threaded as a plot line. It depends more on internal changes. So there's a whole movement in fiction right now about this more meandering idea of plot. And I'm glad for it. I think I'd rather be an author who writes stories that are driven by connection rather than by strife. So that might be something that your readers would like to think about. Like, what kind of approach are you taking to your story? Is it more of a masculine, straight line plot, rise and fall of outer conflict, or is it the more internal, meandering approach? And both are very accepted these days in published writing. And it was a joy for me to find my way to the more feminine approach because I hadn't been trained that way. And it really suits me. So maybe that'd be an interesting little thing for people to research a little.
And I find I do tend to gravitate more towards character-driven stories than strife-driven stories.
Yeah.
I want something that's more about the connection between people.
Mm-hmm. And that's what a lot of us are trying to find in our lives right now, the community and meaningful connections. And that's, I think, very cool if it is paralleled in our literature as well. So
Very
we're
true.
moving that direction. We are.
Now, how do people find your Substack?
Well, it's pretty easy. Substack is marycarrollmoore.substack.com. And they can also go to substack.com and just search for your weekly writing exercise. But the easiest way is to go to my website, marycarrollmoore.com, because there's a newsletter subscription page on each of the main website pages, so they can find it there. I'd love to see some new readers. It's free, and it's every week on Friday mornings. And it's usually some kind of topic like doing what you're most scared of, or more gritty things like working with titles. When I had to design my book title, my agent and I worked on how to do that. And I basically detail the whole process in my Substack so people can understand how titles come about. Book titles are hard. So that was really a cool thing to share with others. I like to share this information that I'm gaining and exploring myself.
I actually have been really interested lately in checking out some of the titles, especially if you can find references to where, like, what the author wanted to title the book if they're traditionally published, and then what the publishing house changed it to.
Right.
It's so fascinating to see the differences in that. And I'm shocked at how wordy they make some of them. I always feel really bad because my books that I write I know my titles are too wordy, and I am going to be repackaging all of the books and rebranding them and kind of cleaning them up a little bit here in the next year, because it's a series. So it's Into the West is the way every one of the titles starts. And it's like Into the West, The Orphan Train, Into the West, A New Home. And I'm like, that needs to be redone. But then I go and I read some of these other titles that publishing houses are putting out, and they're like 3 sentences long.
Which is very hard for cataloging, right?
Yes.
The libraries go nuts. So I was told, don't have more than this many words. And, but yeah, you're right. It's amazing what's coming out right now.
Because they'll have the main title, but then they'll have a colon or a comma and then another whole sentence. And it's like, please stop. What happened to things like Of Mice and Men?
Yeah, I know.
War and Peace.
I wanted to call this book Outlaws. And for a long, long time, I was Outlaws is my book title. I'm not going to give it up. And my agent said, it's going to be seen by people as a Western, and it's not Western at all. And there's no guns or people riding horses or anything like that. There's nothing. So you've got to change the title. So that was a hard process for me to let go of that title. And, but I like the title Woman's Guide to Search and Rescue. I found like there's a metaphor in it, the inner search and rescue and the outer search and rescue. And I like that. So she was right. Darn
it. Sometimes they're helpful.
Yeah.
This has been absolutely fabulous. I want to make sure that all the listeners know, as usual, all of the links to find the information that we've been talking about in this podcast will be in the bottom of the description so that people can just click and go and find all of your information online.
Thank you so much, Dianne. I love talking to you. You have such good questions.
Oh, well, thank you. I just like talking to people, so it makes it easy. And especially when I have somebody like you who has a rich history of experience in so many different fields of which we can speak about. I mean, I think my challenge was just not trying to talk about everything that you have done.
Well, thank you. You brought out the best stuff.
And also, I want to go ahead and mention while I'm on here with you, people need to be checking out the Book Banter Magazine year-end buying guide because you are mentioned in there. And if people are looking to buy your book, there is a buy link where they can just click and go and buy it online.
Thank you. I hope they love it. I love it. I'm passionate about it, and I've gotten such great reviews, and I hope you just adore it when you read it.
Thank you for being with us today.
Thanks, Dianne.
So there you have the incredible Mary Carroll Moore. She is just such a wonderful person to talk to and so knowledgeable about so many different aspects of publishing. There is just so much great information for readers, for writers. Such a wonderful interview. I enjoyed it so much. If you would like to purchase her books or find out how to get on her Substack, go to burkhartbooks.com and check out our Book Banter Magazine's year-end book buying guide. 70 pages of authors with live links to all of their websites, their social media, and buy pages to get their books. This Book Banter Magazine's year-end book buying guide includes every single author who has been on Book Banter with Dianne Burkhart, the Book Talk podcast, since season 1. If there was ever an author that you heard on the show, but you can't remember who they are, but you knew at the time you wanted to get their book, go check out our Book Banter Magazine's year-end book buying guide, and you can find them within those pages. We also have out our December issue of Book Banter Magazine right now with featured author J.B. Kaufman. He is a movie historian and also specializes in books on Walt Disney early animated movie classics. His information in these books is just so fantastic, and he's a wonderful human being. So if you are looking for anything on classic Walt Disney movie animation and you want to find a book about it, check out his work. He is a wonderful person to support, and his work is fantastic. Also, we have Gail Merrifield Papp. She just put out the book, Public Private, My Life with Joe Papp at the Public Theater. And I have to tell you, honestly, this is not a book that I would have been seeking out. It's not something that I would typically read for pleasure. But I absolutely hate this term, unputdownable. It makes my teeth itch, but it fits. Her book was unputdownable. As soon as I started reading this, getting ready for the interview, I was just flipping pages going, oh my God, are you kidding me? Oh my God. The things that she and her husband did in the theater scene in New York City had ripple effects that went across the nation. It's amazing that the things that they were doing in their community were so important to the overall arcing entertainment community. And it's just amazing the things that they accomplished, the works that they brought to the stage, the careers that they helped launch. It's just incredible. Her episode is coming up on December 20th. It is going to be our season finale for Book Banter with Dianne Burkhart for season 2. It's going to be an extra long episode because this is just such an incredibly important book. And she was just so gracious and so wonderful. And we had a very long and incredible, I don't know how else to put it, just an incredible conversation. You're going to be amazed. So be sure to check that out. Check out our Book Banter magazine's December issue, which is on burkhartbooks.com right now. You can get a little bit of a preview of the information on Gail Merrifield Papp and her book, Public-Private, My Life with Joe Papp at the Public Theater. You can find links to check out her website and to go buy her book if you would like to read it before her interview. I can tell you, it's definitely worth a read. But for now, I think we've gone quite long enough for today, so we're going to go ahead and end the episode here. Thank you so much for joining us at Book Banter with Dianne Burkhart, the Book Talk podcast. We look forward to next week when we have our season ender. Things are just getting better every year, and I can't wait to bring you season 3. We've already got big things planned for you. But for now, it's time for you all to go forth and be very merry, or shake it up a bit. Be jolly and bright. See you next week.